I'm Matt Reynolds, and this is my podcast.
I can do the job, but running the business is quite difficult. What a lot of tradesmen lack, and I was probably one of them, is business skills.
I don't mind making mistakes. You learn from your mistakes.
Information is all around you in the minds of people that work beside you.
Welcome back to the Trench Talk podcast. I'm Matt Reynolds, and this week I spoke with serial entrepreneur Ryan Trainor. The idea of these discussions, for those of you joining us for the first time, is to go into the trenches of achievement and talk not with people who are orchestrating from some lofty perspective, but to those high performers who are actually in the trenches, honing their craft. That has included guests from the worlds of business, sport and entertainment, all of whom are on the front lines doing amazing things. Ryan is a super humble guy, and he'd never say it himself, but he's accomplished more in business and life at the age of 44 than most of us have probably ever dreamt possible. He sold his first company to Wilson Parking. He sold his second company to the Washington Post, has been on the BRW Young Rich List, has built schools in India, is a former Carlton Football Club board member and vice president, and has just recently moved his family to Indonesia. We talked about all that and a bunch more, including the role of luck in entrepreneurship, education, the sector he's got a real passion for, and how technology is changing that space, the process of building and selling his companies, some of the hard moments, including how his wife Rachel has supported him throughout the journey, his thoughts on getting more done, running, meditation, raising capital, recruiting key personnel, and the downside of startups. To get in touch with Ryan, head to bschool.edu.au, his current business venture, and opt in for the newsletter. If you enjoy Trench Talk, please remember to hit the subscribe button inside your chosen podcast player and get every episode of the show on release. To connect with me or to suggest guests for the podcast, shoot me an email, podcast@xrm.com.au. Quick shout out to Russell for setting this one up. Enjoy my chat with Ryan Trainor. Ryan Trainor, thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Matt. Looking forward to it.
Now, we're at your place this evening. Thank you for having me over. You've founded, bought and sold many businesses in your journey. For anyone who doesn't know your story, can you give us a bit on what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I guess what I'm doing at the moment is, I suppose the last kind of 20 plus years, my passion's been in education. And spent a lot of time investing and building businesses in that area. Obviously, I had the highs and lows of education along the way as well. But at the moment, two kind of key things we're working on is trying to create a cost-inclusive education pathways for people from around the world in different countries as well, leading them to university. So creating a platform that launches probably in about 6 weeks. So we're kind of under the pump with that at the moment. It's my first kind of foray overseas as well. So there's a lot of nervous energy around that, but I'm really looking forward to it. And I've also got a education design lab called BSchool, where we've got some entrepreneurial programs, but also we do a lot of leadership and culture building within organisations now as well. So I've got some investments in there as well. I've got an amazing involvement in a business called CG Spectrum, which is an animation, film and game design school, bit of a tongue twister there.
Oh, wow.
And we're in about 30 countries now, and 45% of the mentors are Academy Award winners. So literally they go in and support the portfolio of the students and then try and give segues and pathways back to the major studios around the world. So, that's trying to be innovative in that education space where it's evolving really quickly.
So the top people in that field are going back and educating your students, is that?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's kind of almost going back in time to the master and the apprentice. I think that the problem that we're solving, though, is that studios are really finding it hard to find talent, basically. And although there's an altruistic kind of approach by the mentors for wanting to do it, the reality is that the education system a lot at the moment aren't producing graduates that are job ready. So they believe that they actually want to interface more with the students. They're really working hard with their portfolio so that they can pretty much gainfully go into a studio at a level and start building there. So being taught by your future employer as well, kind of cuts that gap. You think about education at the moment, a lot of people are graduating, but they kind of fall off a cliff. They've got this certificate or piece of paper that says that they can do things, but having a network and speaking to the people that will influence the decisions for their careers, it makes a whole heap of sense. And we're seeing a lot of that happening around the world at the moment.
I would have thought in that space that because of the internet and the opportunity to display your work, that they'd have no problems finding talent. So is it there's a lack of talent, or is it a lack of good talent?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, it's a bit like Google. You need to be knowing what you're searching for to be able to find the quality content. And I think if you're a student in Bairnsdale that's got a great portfolio, having the connections and network to be able to find the right people to get your product in front of, or it's not as easy for these students. So I think the education for the future is really about employability. It's about having job-ready skills, and that means they have to interface with industry a lot sooner. Speculating around what we think industry needs and then trying to produce students to support that with little interaction from industry kind of doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And we've got an education system that's a couple of 100 years old, and it's still kind of pumping out similar people. There's some innovation that's kind of happening, but the reality is jobs are moving so quickly now. The skills that we need, do we actually need 4 years for degrees now, for example? I mean, you think about that, by the time you actually graduate, there could be redundancy in a whole range of areas. So what's the most exciting time in education, I guess why I'm still in it, is that we're actually at this amazing stage in history where you've got the evolution of technology, but at the same time, you've got this mass of growing population, particularly through Asia.
Yeah.
I mean, this middle class coming through Asia at the moment, and as us as Australians are where we're situated, there is an enormous opportunity. And I think matching technology now versus like 66% penetration of mobile phones globally now. There's 8 billion more than that now, 8 billion kind of mobile devices kind of connected, it's just crazy kind of numbers actually kind of coming through. So it's a really interesting time to be alive.
So how do you keep up with the changes? There's courses like yours, but in a general sense, things are going so quickly. What do you do yourself to make sure that you stay on top of your game?
Yeah, well, travel. So last year I was, really fortunate enough to go to Singapore to the EdTech conferences, Israel. I read. I'm kind of a student myself in trying to find out, where things at. But I think, obviously there's so much kind of going on. Our job, I guess, now as entrepreneurs in this space is trying to make the complex simple and the simple compelling. Like, what are the things that are really going to break through? And what are the basic principles? Like I've got 3 daughters, 11, 9 and 7. In one edge, I'm looking at kind of EdTech, but if the human our biological kind of makeup is around connection and the ability to collaborate and all these types of things. So on one end, technology creates connection. Yep. On the other end, it can kind of pull us apart. And a lot of the beauty of learning is that kind of collaboration and peer learning. And that's why it's almost ironic that, I've taken my children out of a mainstream kind of education and placed them in Indonesia at an amazing school called the Green School, purely for the fact is I want them to do applied learning and learn about diversity and understanding the thematics of, starting something and following something through and cause and effect and the environment, a whole range of other things which I don't have to go in the depths of today. So I think there's this balance that kind of needs to happen, that we need to support the basic biological needs of humans, but at the same time, we've got to use technology to our advantage. And we've got a lot of people that need to be educated in the world. And there is a direct correlation to, obviously, from education through to lifestyle, economic value to different communities. So I think it's our kind of job now to kind of think about what are the new models to give more people access to this.
I think it's a good foundational sort of understanding to have with this social media and technology revolution, that I guess it's a little bit like money in some ways.
Yes.
It can really work for you, or it can be, you can be a slave to it too,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And you've got to make sure that you're on the right side of that.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can get addicted to all these social media things and all that
Yes.
sort of stuff, and that obviously has a detrimental effect.
Absolutely.
On your life. So I wanted to. Well, you mentioned that the education space, you've had some high points and some low points.
Yeah.
Can we maybe talk through a couple of examples of? Let's start with a good point. What's your favourite part of the education space?
Yeah. I basically stumbled into education. My first business was actually, my mum was a covert loss prevention officer who apprehended shoplifters for a living, so she was probably closest to a superhero you can have as a mum. She's apprehended nearly 10,000 shoplifters now across Australia.
Yep.
So, her stories are just phenomenal. We could just listen to hours for those. But she used to tell me about how much shoplifting happened when she was for working for Coles and Woolworths. So when I was 22, I actually, I didn't go to university as well, which is again another irony of all of this, but I've later on gone and done education. But I actually wrote a course on how to reduce shoplifting. And then I went around to all the local chambers of commerce and small retailers. So that was actually my first foray into education, looking at a need and literally sitting down and building a course and then going out and the cause and effect of actually going and fronting up the people and trying to sell that course. That led into a whole new channel of business, but that kind of got me into education. And since then, I've been really fortunate. I guess the thing that I probably most publicised was a business in workforce education, where there was we kind of grew a large workforce education business, educating about 25,000 people around Australia. And that process was amazing for me because it was off the back of having a small success in my first business, which was the loss prevention education business, which actually then spun into a personnel business. But I went through a hiatus of a few years where I just completely ran out of tools in my tool belt. So I went back to education myself, and I did a 3-year kind of course at MIT, but for like 2 weeks a year. But out of all of that learning, I learned some amazing things through that process. What I learned, I applied to my workforce education business. And that journey of 3 years, understanding where your weaknesses are and trying to surround yourself with strong people. I employed 2 key people. I understood that I'm great at leading and a lot of the strategy side, but implementation was a little bit of a weakness there. So I remember, I recruited 2 key people. My CFO, who was a 50-year-old kind of ex-PwC auditor that is a South African.
And how old were you at this point?
I was about 35, 35, and a ex-chemical engineer who was the CEO of ExxonMobil's retail arm, and convinced them to come into the business. And I tell a story where his name was Damien. I knew he was the right guy when I went around to his house, and I went out to the backyard through the back door, and his pegs were colour coordinated and perfectly symmetrical. And I just thought, geez, for the eye for detail, it's perfect. So if you look at fond memories, actually being able to grow one of the largest kind of businesses in that area, in traineeships and apprenticeships, having an amazing team together, and having the wind at your back. You don't realise till after sometimes you finish a venture, the luck and chance that kind of comes into it. And there's so much stuff went right for me in that journey. So it was very stressful near the end that we can chat about later. But I just think about those times, and, when you're in the trenches and you're building the team and things are going right at those times, it's intoxicating. I think that's, as an entrepreneur, you thrive in that kind of environment.
Well, it's a human's need to grow, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
When you're growing out of control, it can get addictive. I can totally see that. So your 2 key guys.
Yes.
How did you convince them? Because you got to a point where you knew you needed to bring in some extra help. Did you know them? Were they friends? Were they introduced? How do you convince someone as a 35-year-old, talking to an accomplished 50-year-old, to come and, I guess at that point, take a chance on you? Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. I think, one of the key things I took away from the time at MIT was it takes the same amount of effort sometimes to play big that it does to play small, and also knowing what you don't know. So I was really determined to come back, and I almost felt like in the early 30s, I was like a draft pick in the footy, an early draft pick that kind of hadn't had my real breakout. I'd had my security business that I grew, exited, and went well, but I kind of felt that next 6-7 years I was searching, and I realised there's so much I don't know. It was a really humbling experience within my life. So coming back, I was really determined of finding great people. So before I kind of joined with Damien and Peter, those two guys, I actually went and I found one of the top corporate advisors to help put it together. And we actually raised, through equity and debt, nearly $20 million. And at that stage, to be absolutely honest, and it just shows you how quickly you can learn and work, is I put a great plan together with his support, Richard Forbes, who's at 333 Capital, and probably now one of my closest mates, funny enough, over the journey, because he's just been like, I've never met someone with such integrity, and he's just supported me unconditionally through that time. And you need great people in your corner.
So for someone who doesn't sort of understand too deeply that process,
yes.
you had an idea and you went to him.
Yeah, I had an idea around what I wanted to do. I wanted to consolidate training businesses around Australia.
Okay.
I said, here's where the need is. There's no businesses supporting large corporate businesses in trainees and apprenticeships. Each state government has got different rules and regulations to funding. We need to be able to provide a cohesive one-stop shop for large corporate businesses in this traineeship and apprenticeship space.
Okay.
To be able to do that, we need to buy a platform business. Right?
Okay.
We need to acquire a business.
Yeah.
So having the experience to do that, you can do that in a few ways. Obviously, you can raise equity and investors, but also, I learnt again through MIT around debt. Some people, as Australians, we kind of can be really apprehensive around debt. Like debt's a bad word.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But obviously, debt used in the right times, you can kind of leverage your own equity to be able to not have to raise more equity to kind of keep a larger part, as long as you can service it.
Yeah.
So the key to an acquisition like that is that it needs to be a good cash flow business that can support the debt.
Yep.
And you need to ensure there's a lot of rigor around that. So, once you do the acquisition, it just doesn't evaporate. And that's always a challenge in itself. So then finding Richard, supporting that, making some amazing people on the way, but also then finding a board. So before I actually hired the two guys, I thought the key thing is to build myself with really credible people that actually know the industry, support it. So if you talk about how do you convince people, there was an amazing guy who was the ex-federal treasurer called Ralph Willis, and he was under Hawke, who actually introduced apprenticeships and traineeships. Through one of my mates, it was his uncle. So I took Ralph out for coffees 7 times. And I said, Ralph,
No one buys on the first exposure.
Exactly
that's what they
right.
say, isn't it?
Exactly. And I said to Ralph, look, in the end of the day, everybody is intrinsically motivated by something.
Yeah.
We're always in life trying to sell people why they should do things. Understanding under what circumstances they would do something is sometimes flipping that and thinking around it. And when I thought about it, I thought, Ralph has one of the most highest morals and values I've come across. I said to Ralph, wouldn't it be amazing that this is one of the programs federally that you kind of created? How about being on the coalface of that and actually looking at what you created and seeing that actually being applied out there in industry and helping kind of realise the vision that you actually created at a high level, but kind of at the coalface. And then so Ralph came on board. So I had great advisors. I had Ralph, ex-federal treasurer, who created literally the traineeship apprenticeship program that I am now involved in.
Yep.
Amazing lady out of Investec called Kate Spargo, and then someone from Westpac when we raised the debt and equity. So then with Damien and Peter, then I said to Damien and Peter, hey, listen, I need these. We've got amazing people behind it. We're funded. These are the areas that I need support in. Let's do this together. So they actually put money in themselves and it also is they were highly motivated because it was almost like a great quantum step for them, even in their lives. Like, this is a go, this is a crack at it. You know what I mean?
And it sounds like a lot of the ground level hard work, you'd done that and you'd presented and you'd laid it out for them, right? So it wasn't a pie in the sky sort of stuff. This was locked in, it was done. You had the financing by then. So you purchased the platform business, or did you create that? You purchased
it.
Okay.
And I think that's a lot of the thing is that a lot of people talk about startups.
Yep.
Now, the opportunity cost of acquisition versus a startup. I mean,
I wanted to ask you about this. Yeah,
at a startup, you've got, and I'm doing one at the moment. I swore I'd never do it again. But you do it. But a startup, there's a lot of risks because there's a lot of assumptions that you make, and 90% of them are generally wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's so much risk, and there's so like you're not taking money at the start. You're bootstrapping to there. You're trying to find the right people. You go to market and iterate. Go to market and iterate. It's such a journey. Whereas I think there's this hybrid model of having a startup mentality with a vision, but having a platform that you can almost treat like a startup and put your vision on top of it. These foundation businesses that we bought, I kind of knew what the messaging would need to be, but how long was it going to take me to get government contracts? How much was it going to be to help me build an L&D team? So then by going in and actually having a clear vision for the people that were in that business as well, I would say that in my team now, I've still got people that were with me 12 years ago.
Oh, really?
And it's because people want to be part of something. So when you're going into a business like this, one of the things that what I think sometimes we get challenged is we always say, hey, you go into an acquisition, you say nothing is going to change, right? And then the reality is after 30 to 60 days, it becomes status quo. So then if you actually make change, people start going, oh, bloody hell. So people are expecting it at the start.
Yep.
So as long as you're really considered and have a vision of where you want to go, you're saying, look, we're not going to change. This isn't about saying that what we're doing here is wrong or right. What we're saying is here's the vision and this is where we're kind of going to. So you have this startup mentality, but with a platform business. So then what can you do? You've got humans in there that it's working. You've got a salary that you can potentially take as well. You've got cash flow that can kind of get in there as well. You've got customers that you can kind of expand upon. You've got customers you can say to new customers that you've got customers.
Yep.
So it is a rolling start sometimes.
So the first day you do the transaction and you actually purchase the business.
Yep.
So you walk in on the first day. How does that play out? Because we've never done this before. So is it Wolf of Wall Street style where you sort of stand up and give a big talk, or do you get around and meet key personnel? How does that sort of, on a practical level, how does that start?
I mean, through due diligence, what you're doing is you're then having catch-up coffees with the key people.
Oh, so you know a lot of them before.
You know a lot of them beforehand.
Yep.
And obviously, you can't demand respect and you can't expect them to be believable, to be yourself, to be believable up front. You can't cast that thought pattern early. Trust is built. So I think that I would hope over the journey I'm relatively down to earth. So I try and be as transparent as possible. But obviously, we talked about it, even we had just a catch up before we started chatting, is that people in life are driven because they want to evolve.
Yeah, with the growth thing you mentioned,
And people want to be part of something.
Yeah.
And sometimes actually you go in there thinking people don't want change, but actually they do.
Yeah.
Like the thing, this is exciting, we'll see how this kind of goes. And then over time you kind of build trust, and every decision you make early defines who you are as a leader to them as well. And I've done a lot of acquisitions over the time now, and some have worked and some have been challenged along the way as well. But I think there is a really great opportunity for thinking about acquisitions versus pure startup. And it's that a lot of the time people are just daunted by like, how am I going to fund it?
Yeah.
Oh my God, where do I find this? How do I do the due diligence and all these things? But the reality is everything's painful. It's pain. There's always barriers to entry to do a startup. There's barriers to entries to buy businesses. And I'm not saying it's absolutely right to go that way, but for me, I think as an entrepreneur, I'm a growth guy.
Yeah.
And I actually love going out there, interfacing with customers and people and the networks. When I'm going through that build phase, I'd rather cut my own eyes out. Like, it's exciting, but I'm like this like caged lion. Like, I want to get out there and talk about it and engage people and get feedback and get challenged and these types of things. So I think it's everyone to their own, though, and their own personal style.
You're a very likable person. Where does your ability to inspire other people come from? Because that's really what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, right? You're number one. You're at the helm of most of the things that you've done. Where does it come from?
Well, thank you. But I think if I go back in time, I grew up in markets, getting up at 3 a.m., working through to 9 p.m., real middle-class family. Where I am today, I kind of feel like, and I want to talk about luck today as well, being in the position I am in today, I don't take for granted, because so much has to go right to actually be there. But I think that there's a real work ethic, and I really appreciate diversity, and so I think having that kind of curiosity with people, I'm generally interested. There's so much you can learn kind of constantly. And I know it sounds really cliche, but that kind of philosophy around I think if you're a dickhead before you kind of have had maybe some success in business, you're going to be a dickhead after it.
Yeah.
And I think if you've been grown up with specific values, I think once you start getting ahead of yourself, life can really punch you in the nose a lot as well. And I've had my fair share of punches in the nose. So I just feel now, if I can be really honest, grateful to actually, I'm grateful that I was been with my wife for 23 years. I've got 3 amazing kids. Like, I'm fortunate, and biologically fortunate too, because I was born in this country to parents who cared for me. There's so much bloody luck's got to go your way. So I think, when you kind of, I think, have a philosophy like that, and it's not that I don't have moments of ego and all these other things. I think I've got 40 years to go probably in life at the moment, probably at best.
Yeah.
I just think if you take it too seriously and you get too ahead of yourself, life get an amazing way. So to really kind of surmise that is that I'm loving the journey. It's been tough, and I really don't, and I'm really grateful. So I think for that, there's just this, why be a dick? You know what I mean? Just enjoy it.
Yeah. If you're going to do something in life, in any aspect, why not make it fun? Pretty much what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
And if you can, then that would be the way to go, because you're here for, even another 40 years. Like, why not have a few laughs along the way,
And I think also is that you think about it and you go, well, what is your role as a leader, right? And I think, leadership and building a culture in business is about ensuring people are actually defining who they are.
So the people you're leading.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, my job is to help define who they are to their community. Like, and what I mean by that is not from an evangelistic perspective, but I always believe in the barbecue test. When you're at a barbecue and they say, hey, Matt, what do you do? I always thought, if my team said I'm just part of a training company, I've failed.
That's a fail, yeah.
As a leader,
Yep.
right? So I think when you're talking about helping define people, is it kind of creating a culture and creating a business that people are proud to be part of.
Yep.
And that then gives kind of that purpose. And I think you don't want to over-labour that in some senses, because some people are just transient, but your general kind of team, and that's why it's so important these days with having a business with purpose. Not the warm, fluffy stuff, tree-hugging stuff all the time, but I'm talking about that there is some good in what you're doing.
Well, there's a real movement, isn't there, in that direction generally, I think. We're seeing that with a number of different businesses now, and it's an important aspect from me, the outside looking in on these businesses, to have, because not only for your marketing purposes and all that sort of stuff, but you're talking about from the angle
of talent, people.
Yeah, recruitment, creating a place where you want to be, where you can do your best, all those things. So it's super, super important.
Just really quickly on that is that when we were growing the workforce education business, it was, you could see we were growing. So, I mean, we kind of got nearly probably out to well over 200 in the team. Yeah. But when you get to certain levels of team members, there is dips in culture, because at the start you're the guy in doctoring. Whereas then when you're going into office, the head office in every state, like I hadn't met some of the people. So how do you actually keep that kind of culture, and what's the values? What's the values? How are you embedding that in the organisation? And one of the big things was for me is to understand that people in education are being there because they generally want to help people.
Yeah.
So we actually connected for every hour that we trained, that we actually started building schools in India.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
So we built, in the end, 2 schools, 700 homeless girls were going through the school. And our team in India, and it came through a chance conversation that we actually got involved in it. But what happened is our team members then started visiting there, and our clients and wanted to say, God, that's amazing, probably want to be part of that. You know, we started doing fundraising because that was what we're doing. You weren't driving people as hard for P&L because they knew that every outcome kind of helped. So I think profit and making money is not bad, because then it creates freedom to choose what you want to do with it.
Of course, yeah.
Ethics in how you do it is important, right? But creating a profitable business with purpose, well, why not? You know, and I think that's where a lot of the entrepreneurship is kind of going now. And I think you're going to find, even with the 4 kind of horsemen, even the big tech companies now, they started off that way. Yeah. But it feels like the evolution has kind of come where people are questioning that.
Yeah.
You know, so it's an evolving thing that once you grow, you can generally lose some of your core values in that too.
All the way through to the exit of that business, did you keep that? Were you still building schools in India?
Yeah, and basically when we did Washington Post bought the business, and part of the agreement is when I signed it, I said, I'm only doing the deal if you fund this for the next 3 years. So that was in the sale agreement.
So you locked that in? Locked
it in.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, and it was important to me, and it was important for the project that we're doing, and it was important for our people. Yeah. So that was actually negotiated with their lawyers in there.
Is that something they'd heard before?
Well, I don't know. I think there was just a commitment to funding it. Okay. I think it was for them just a cost. They'll probably just think it's a cost of doing business and actually doing it. But it was something which was very meaningful to me because I had given my word on some things, and I personally and our team didn't want to let them down.
So you've started this business, you've assembled a team of an unbelievable degree of talent.
Yes.
You've built the team, you're growing. Yeah. From the outside, everything would look fantastic.
Yes.
Why get out?
Yeah, and that is
it's the obvious question. But
and it is a great one, and I think that is always the entrepreneur's dilemma. I mean, behind the scenes with all these things is that, you know, the story, if we had to just cut the podcast now, would go, okay, you know, this guy was kissed on the nose and it all went well. But behind the scene is that you're the duck paddling, you know, and for myself and Rach, you know, I say Rach because she's my wife and we're on the journey together, is that, you know, when you're a shareholder with private equity in a bank, you know, when you're doing acquisitions, to keep your equity, you need to keep chipping in.
Yeah.
You know, and
because your own gets diluted as you
get
purchase,
diluted as you keep going. And so in the end, Rach and I made a decision to sell our house.
Okay.
So we, you know, and a lot of, if that was just headlines on the Herald Sun, like father sells house to fund business, you know, you'd be going, oh God, that's pretty reckless. At the time though, data and all the metrics were all pointing in the right direction, right?
Okay.
So,
and that's sorry to stop you, but that's just to chip in so you didn't keep getting diluted.
Correct.
Okay, yep.
So we'd basically, that the house was in.
Yep.
So that's a fair bit of stress.
I'd imagine.
It was a fair, and at the same time we had, we were renting and keeping on chipping in, and we were getting pretty low. We were getting, you know, pretty close to the ground with kind of from a financial perspective at the same time. At the same time, my dad got diagnosed with cancer.
Yep.
A bit beforehand, and I had that kind of there, and then I had my second daughter kind of coming along. And you know what? It was a decision where I felt that sometimes you got to put your family first. And the acquisition at the time was with what I thought was the right move from a strategic point of view. The reality with acquisitions is it doesn't always work out to plan. We can chat about that later. But to put it frankly, the stress that I was under at that time, particularly through the acquisition process. I mean, the day we sold, I think Rach and I had $50 in our bank account. But to the outside world, no one kind of knows that stuff.
Yeah.
Dad's got cancer, probably got a certain amount of time to live. And around that time as well, I mean, I've said a couple of times, but the day that we actually sold, just imagine a long boardroom. They had all their lawyers from Asia, from America on the phone, my lawyers, and I thought, if this doesn't go through, I'm bloody finished anyway. But the due diligence process, which I made a huge amount of learning through, was kind of long and gated. A few kind of, it took another 3 months than I thought. I just remember each night I thought it was eight weeks to go, and I hate putting out the bins. So I was like, only 8 bin nights. So every bin night became happy. Right, that's another week down.
Yeah.
And the absolute relief when it was actually nearly 5 o'clock, we had to pay out the debt. So they were writing a check for the debt as well.
Yep.
It was like a slow motion movie. The actual lawyer from our side had to literally run and physically give a check to the bank. So it was like 5 minutes to go. She got the check. She's running out of the room. The check's passed over. I actually took a moment and went to the room next door, and the stress of it all, I bawled my eyes out, to be really honest. And that was because there was 2 overwhelming feelings, right?
Yeah.
And the first one was relief. And the relief is that at the same time, from a point of proving to yourself you could do it.
Which is big.
Which is an interesting, because it goes back to the stage, and is it ego? We can debate that. But I was in groups like entrepreneurs, organisation stuff, and got these peers. It almost felt also like, for me, it's like I just wanted to prove that I had it in me.
Yeah.
Like I could follow through on something and I could do it.
Yeah.
So there was a relief that there was a release from the fear of failure.
Okay.
That's
how you thought about it at the time.
Well, I was feeling like the whole way through, you're always on an edge, like this could come crashing down. But it was the business were there, but you just always, because I had so much on the line.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, was just family and what can I do with this now? Because for us, again, very middle class family, growing up in Eltham, it was a generational change of wealth potentially for us. So that becomes with responsibility. And so I didn't tell Rach on that day we were settling, because we had a few false starts. And I remember I rang Rach and I said, book a restaurant. And it wasn't because I was keeping her in the dark, but we'd just been on this emotional roller coaster, although she's as steady as they come. And then I rang my mum and my dad and brother, and we had this dinner. And at the end of it, I said to Dad, can you pick up the bill, because I couldn't pay for it.
The check hasn't cleared yet.
And how ironic is all of
funny,
that? And but it gave me the privilege of spending the next 12 months with my dad. It gave me the experience of doing a lot of things for my family that I always wanted to do. It kind of changed our life in some great ways, and obviously some great life lessons that kind of came out of it as well.
And you said 2 feelings, one being relief. What was the other feeling?
It was joy in, and that, to being able to support, my family.
Yeah.
I didn't want my dad to have to worry about anything. My mum, from the loss prevention days, had backed me even financially in things at this stage, and to be able to do things like, one thing I did for my mum, I still remember, which I'm going today, but it was something that was on such a deep level, and the reaction from her was just, I'll never forget, and to be able to do that for your parents when they've done so much for you, and also to be able to repay Rachel's faith. I mean, she's unconditionally supported me. I've basically taken her on a roller coaster ride. She's been the co-pilot up the front with me.
Yeah.
And then for us to kind of sit there and be grateful because of the luck that I actually realised that happened.
Yep.
The other thing just to take away from that is that Rachel always says to me, you'd be really disappointed, Ryan, about what other people kind of think of you.
I've heard you say that before, yeah.
And it's a really interesting thing, because as much as I worried about my team, and I believed with all my integrity that it was the right decision for the business at that time as well.
Yep.
But you actually sometimes put far too much thought into what actually people, like the oracle hasn't gone.
Yeah.
People get on with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, you sometimes overthink that part of it. Like, people love being part of that journey. So I think one of the things, that I learned post that as well is that you're very quickly forgotten.
Yeah.
As well. So
Absolutely.
you attach some of your own ego to that sometimes, and it was a great lesson for me. And I've still got lifelong friends out of it, but the impact, you believe you're having sometimes is not quite maybe on par with the reality of what is happening.
Of what it is within your team.
Well, I just think about what you actually. Life goes on. They wake up again. Sometimes, people, if the mortgage is paid and it's a secure there. But saying that, I've had a lot of people in my team come back and join because there is an alignment of values. There's nothing different. Like, we are just the same people with same values. So I think, people really want to be still part of that sometimes. So I've got, people that have been with me for a long, long time. So I think that is really pleasing for me as a person, because it means that, and all it really means is that we share a lot of values, and they're the type of people I want to kind of surround myself with at the same time.
You mentioned a very stressful time through the latter part of that business, and then leading into the sale. How do you deal with that stress? Because it's a big team. It's a huge company looking at your business. Yeah. There's a lot going on. How do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's funny. I think from the outside, Rachel would argue with this, but
maybe
from
we
the
should
outside,
ask her.
I think my demeanour is I am very much a person who is very intuitive.
You do not look like you've got a worry in the world. So,
well, yeah.
From the outside, that's the perception that I'm getting. I mean, we've only sort of just met, but there's that very cool, calm, in control sort of persona. So,
and I think that persona is what kind of helps build confidence. And my job is to kind of shield people from the stress. But because of that, that takes the toll.
Yeah.
People need to be meta-focused on what they need to achieve. I don't need to be putting on the stress. There needs to be kind of a lot of realism and truism to the situation that we're in, and I'll be kind of very honest and transparent in those type of situations.
Yeah.
But my job is to lead and shield them from a lot of that, like a lot of those worries. So for me, I kind of have it inside and get quite anxious. And I think, I've got big jaws because I kind of grind my teeth at night. But I started finding outlets like in running.
Yeah.
Over the last 12 months to 2 years in meditation. And so I just feel that, I need to have all these different outlets. And Rach probably copped the brunt of that sometimes as well, like, because you can kind of let your guard down in these type of situations as well. And that's not fair on them. I mean, we've got just, I'm so lucky to have Rach. Like, it's just ridiculous and so supportive. And she's so calm and even. And as much as anything, I can be still a roller coaster. But so I think through those times, once you got purpose and you got really going to goal focus. But, I've had flat spots as well. Like, I think I've had some depression at times and a whole range of other stuff, because if you're in a situation for a long period of time, you fight or flight and you're draining yourself all the time.
Yeah.
And at some stage your reserves kind of run out, and probably over the last 12 months, to be fair, that happened to me as well. So you had to kind of rebuild.
The last 12 months of that business?
Recently.
Oh, recently? Okay.
Yeah, I think it catches up with you.
Yeah, right, okay.
At the same time, and from the outside in, everyone kind of goes, God, bloody lucky bloke, that, and had that good result and stuff like that. But shit, that took 15 years and stress, and where I'm going to find the money, and not having money in the bank, and borrowing money from parents to pay a school fee, and keeping up appearances around these times. And is that client going to stay there? Oh my God, that person's kind of leaving. Oh, is it going to go through? Oh no, all these types of things you're living and breathing. And I remember sometimes I'm in the fetal position on the couch.
Yeah.
So I think anyone who says it's easy is bullshitting.
Yeah.
Really. Like, it's a tough journey, but it's about how we deal with it. And I think the older you get, the more equilibrium you have and the less spikes up and downs you have, because you understand that the journey, shit's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's how I deal with it. We're at the start, you're going, shit's happening. holy shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, how am I going to deal with all this? Oh my God, the world's going to end.
Yeah.
But I think as you keep getting and evolving and with age, you realize that that's the journey.
Yeah.
The journey is all these things are going to be coming at me. The skill of entrepreneurship now, I think, is around how you deal in the fringes of unpredictability.
Yeah.
How you deal in these situations is where you win or lose, not the master plan in where you're kind of going often.
Yeah, no, I understand. Most of the accomplished business people that I've spoken with, sooner or later, one or two things normally comes up: anxiety or depression, or if not clinically diagnosed cases of that, certainly feelings that maybe they could have suffered that from that themselves. So it's interesting because you're really pushing the boundaries, right?
Yes. And you feel like you've got a lot of responsibility. Just chip in there for one thing is that, when you got 200 families that are relying on you.
Yeah. And they've got mortgages to pay just like you do. And some of them are borrowing money to pay for dinner just like you are, right?
That's a responsibility.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to definitely dislocate yourself from that when you have to make hard decisions, and you've got to make hard decisions, right?
Yeah.
But that is still a responsibility that you feel, and that weighs on you at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you, and this may be an age thing, but how do you learn, and it may be practice, to handle more of this stuff? Because if you take you and I and we compare ourselves to a really high-level athlete or a prime minister or a president or something like that, it's probably fair to say that they have on their plates on a constant 24/7 basis a lot more to deal with than what we do.
Yes.
How do they handle it? How do you build yourself? And it's a mental thing. I know it is, but how do you get to the point where you can deal with more of that and still be functional, keep moving forward, keep growing? Because some people can run countries, and some people, if they run 7 minutes late to dinner, it throws their whole week out.
Yeah, gotcha.
So there's that gap in between. So how do you move up that ladder?
It's actually a question that I deeply think about, funny enough, in the sense that I think the challenge is when you're kind of, with entrepreneur as you're starting, you believe that you're the center of all good ideas, right?
Yeah.
And you're making all the decisions, right? What actually kind of happens, I think, and I've found that recently as well, is that, and I'll get to the answer, but just in a bit of a longer way, but is that, after having the success of that business, right, things can kind of happen where you actually can start to assign genius to yourself of what previously happened. So what happens with that is you start creating a narrative around the success that you've had, right?
And overstate your importance.
Influence on that.
Yes, okay, yep.
And then you start believing that you can over-influence, and you start overreaching in your own capability.
Yep.
Right? So you'll see there's only actually the stats that I read recently that on your second business or start, there's only a 2% actual extra chance that you'll be successful.
Over the first one.
Yeah.
So there's still pretty bad odds, really.
Well, yeah, it just shows you that just because you had one does not guarantee success again.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time is because you start being able to think that you can influence areas, and that because you've created this narrative around success and how you influenced it, right?
Yeah.
So you'll actually see a lot of people fail second times because they start getting into areas where they don't actually have the expertise, but they've got overconfidence in being to think that they can influence situations.
And we see that with sports people a lot, right?
Yeah.
Changing sports, coming back. And
And you think about business entrepreneurs that have gone in and then think they go again and then lose it all.
Yeah.
And Ray Dalio actually, and I resonated with this, is that it's about having complete open-mindedness now. Like, I feel like to be able to manage these big situations, you need more data inputs. You need to surround yourself with people. So it's almost, you need to have smart people in the areas that you need them to help you make decisions. You cannot grow and make all the decisions by yourself. So the mindset needs to really shift.
Okay.
And I find that the more that you scale, the more that you actually have to get people in, because you can't influence things. So the whole idea is that you need to have people challenge you all the time in your thought.
Okay.
And you need to start putting your ego at the back,
Yeah.
Right. So to be able to scale and to think about looking at governments and things like this is that they surround themselves with matter experts that are highly believable or highly attuned to those specific disciplines.
Yeah.
Their data inputs for you to then make the right decisions, right? So intuition still plays a part, but the more you go, the more you have to kind of surround yourself. And I found that after my success that I felt that in times I assigned genius to what I created a narrative, and that narrative does not take into consideration some of the things that were luck.
Yeah.
The reality is that the journey, there's so much randomness kind of going in. You cannot engineer success. You can have a goal, you can be highly focused, but the reality is around how do we deal with that randomness? How do we deal with all this decision making? And I feel that is really around surrounding yourself with good people and helping you scale to make better decisions.
So are you delegating some of the decisions? That's what you're saying, right? As you grow.
I'm a lot more open-minded now.
Okay.
To listening.
Right.
Like challenging, like not assuming that I'm right anymore.
Okay. Yeah.
Like when you're going and at the start you're assuming you need to have that naive energy when you're starting to think that you're right because you wouldn't have bloody done it in the first place,
Exactly. You
right?
needed to start. That's right.
But I think as you're maturing, and I think, so my last business, which we've had to completely restructure because of government regulation, and that was a great learning lesson when you're thinking about learning and failure in some areas, is that the mistake I made was that when you're growing quickly, like we were growing very quickly, and you start building and surrounding yourself with executioners of your ideas, because you're growing, because it's working, right?
Yeah.
When things start not going right, those executioners start looking at you to make all the decisions, right?
Because they're only following your instructions anyway.
So the great learning of all of that is that, getting that mix of unique thinkers that can take leads and be highly responsible. So not employing people in your own shadow of what you think they are, having people that will challenge you within those processes, having independent thinkers and getting the mix of those right was a really humbling experience at the same time. And that's why I'm so excited what I'm doing at the moment. Like I'm just headhunting the people that I believe are, and you can get that wrong too, but are just unique thinkers in their specific areas, and then building team to help execute that rather than me kind of being the central focus of kind of the organisation. I'm just a cog within that, the visionary, kind of selling the dream in regarding it, but there's a lot more robust thinkers within the organisation.
So do you need to have a lot of patience when you're hiring then?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
If you're going after those key positions, that's probably an obvious thing to say, I know. But
no, it's true.
Yeah, okay. So you've got to get that, well, you don't always get it right, but you've got to try and get that right as much as you can.
And I think there's there's two things around capability and values. And you've got to get both of those right.
And how does the ratio work for you? Like if you sat down, are you skewed one way over the other, or how does that work?
If I don't feel like we have shared values, they're not in.
Okay.
Because that's the operating system of the organisation.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of rules like I kind of think around with that is, would I take them home to meet my mum?
Okay. So when you sit down to interview someone,
would they actually
good way of looking at it.
If we were going out, would they actually wear the company T-shirt?
Yeah.
Now, I know it sounds like really kind of things, but and also I want to know what their superpower is. I completely understanding what is unique to them and what their skills are is what interests me most, and giving them the opportunity to do that.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Without trying to with an incumbents in a way of trying to allow them to focus on that part of it. So for me in that area then, that from a technical perspective, they've got to be there, but specifically from a values perspective, it's highly important.
So the values obviously carries the weight.
The values carries the weight, but you can't have, and also where they're at their journey also depends on what role you put them in.
Yeah, timing is so critical, isn't it, with these things?
Because sometimes, like if you try and get a guy, girl from an organisation and bring them into a fast-moving business without potentially the resources that they had, they could be the greatest matter expert ever. But you bring them in and they've had a 500 people under them to manage them, and they're coming in, they're going, I'm back in the trenches.
Yeah.
So you also got to find the right. So it's almost like at that stage you're finding who's the second in charge that is the breakout.
Yeah.
Who's going to be so meaningful for them to make this kind of opportunity. It's also like, I think even with business partners sometimes, or co-founders, I kind of feel sometimes you can't relive the party with the same person.
Oh, okay.
Often because I feel that you had a journey. It's like trying to relive that same great night that you had out.
Yeah, okay.
And also, I know I'm highly motivated, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes after a win, are they going to stay up to 2 a.m. sometimes and get shit done?
Yeah.
Are they? Because you want someone to, it's their go.
Yeah.
So I think, it's understanding what motivates them, that shared value, and are they highly competent? Am I putting them in a role where their superpower is actually going to be engaged?
Yeah.
And I think that's where they flourish.
Absolutely,
that's like, holy, this is exactly what I want to do. So when I'm kind of thinking of my line of thinking, and it's funny, it's like I meet a lot of people, which I'm really fortunate to. I'm like a filing cabinet. Like I'm super interested in what they're passionate about, which is an overused word, but what really interests them, what their superpower is, not always using that word with the right people, with all the people.
Yes.
And I store that away. So often I'll meet someone a year or two and think, God, that I just know that person is the right person. So when you're going and saying to them, this is the opportunity, you're positioning it with the knowledge of knowing what their drivers are.
So you're almost in like a constant recruitment mode.
Completely,
Okay.
all the time.
Right.
And it's funny, sometimes when people say, oh, can I have a coffee? I set aside a day a month and I just log it in with the coffees.
So you plan that and go and do it.
Yeah, and that is where it's almost like, hey, they're on their journey. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And the funny thing is out of that is that I've probably hired 3 people out of those coffees over the journey that have become long-lasting team members and also become great friends.
With the coffee thing, is that, have you reached the point in your journey yet where you really want to give back to the younger generation coming through? And the reason I asked that is you mentioned Ray Dalio before we started and
yes.
during recording as well. And I saw an interview recently where he actually talked through that, where he's actually to the point now where he wants to pass on, like, he's done enough, he's got enough, he's built the biggest hedge fund in the world or whatever he's done, and now he's turned his focus to actually passing some of that knowledge on. Have you reached the point where that is starting to become a focus?
I feel that it's been my focus the whole way.
Right, okay.
And that is, I think it's all you're doing is, and people have done it for me, like there's a really well-known merchant banker in Sydney, and through my journey, I caught up with him for coffees, right? And he gave me his time, for no direct outcome, and his advice along the way. I used to go away almost crying after I met this guy because he used to pull me apart but I needed him because he was guys, they're going to get you. This is going to happen. Da-da-da-da. So I was bloody like a cat on a hot tin roof. But, I just look at him but then the whole way through, without going over, like I've got funded an incubator down in Tasmania. Yeah. Coffees along the way. BSchool we've had more than 1,000 entrepreneurs kind of go through now. We've got all these different things that we've done. That is not giving back. That's not giving back. That's just the ecosystem. You're having a conversation with another person. Like, I'm genuinely interested in what you're doing. Like, what's something that I'm going to, selfishly get from this transaction? You're
not thinking along those lines. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
You're going, it's just, and I think is when you start not doing that, the challenge is that, you just got to keep it under control. And also some people, they're coming, you're having a conversation, they want you to give them the answers. It's not the answers. All I can do is kind of share my experiences and I want you to share yours. And, you've got young people coming in and catching up. I'm still only mid-40s, so I'm hopefully starting to be still not too old. But, God, they know so much more than I know. They've got business models that I don't. And it's not about me just learning, like, oh my God, this is happening. It's nothing. It's the interaction and innovation, what they're kind of doing, it inspires me. It kind of keeps me going as well.
I just want to go back to the running and meditation.
Yes.
If that's okay. I'm not sure if are you an athlete as a younger guy? You got a sporting background. I know you're into sports, but playing yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I just, all through high school, I didn't go to university. I was a sport. Like, I just love sport and still love sport, but it was lacrosse and basketball.
Okay. And did you fall out of doing that when you were in the depths of building business?
Yeah, so lacrosse was my life growing up.
Okay.
Funny enough. And I kind of achieved some reasonable things throughout it as well. And actually, when I was the last 2 years, I went back because I had some unfinished business to do, and went back with my brother to our old club and got a lot of friends together to play just for the love of it as well. But and now I coach all my daughters in basketball, and I just love it.
Awesome.
But for me, sport is just a recipe for life.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, it's just so good, and learning to win and lose, understanding, with teammates and also effort. A lot of things these days, I think with kids and stuff like that, is that it's cause and effect. Like you can actually, in sport, you can see if you train, there's a result. If you put in effort within a game, it can affect the result. And there's so few things sometimes in life that you can actually get those life lessons for. And life lessons, life's about the soft skills. The technical skills are evolving so quickly, like resilience, empathy, teamwork, collaboration. They're all the basic software we need to download. And what better way of getting that as a kid, or even as an adult, than the passion of sport?
And you learn a lot about luck in sport too, right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Some days the ball bounces your way and others it doesn't. So,
absolutely right.
So you grew up playing sport, you stopped playing in the trenches of business, and then you rediscovered that later.
Yeah.
Talk me through that process. Had you finished, you'd exited the business when you went back and started to get back involved in sports?
Yeah, I think I was always really interested, and I probably got involved in an AFL footy club and got involved in sport in other ways as well from a passion and I just love it, and I just wanted to get involved and influence things in a specific way. But I think for me, I took up running because I'm a competitive beast in some ways, and I always have been. Like, even if I have a game of table tonight, losing, probably got a lot better now.
Yeah.
But with running, I needed something which was really about being selfish, and running was like you can switch off, and it's a time when you're by yourself, and it's a bit like a plane flight. Like, people, if they bring Wi-Fi into plane flights, I hate that.
It's over,
because it's the last time you can escape and be guilt-free from all these different kind of interruptions. And I think when you're running, what happens is you're only against yourself. So I started with me being me in that sense is like, all right, I'm going to do a marathon. So then I kind of studied like, all right, how do you do a sub 3 hour marathon? Like, then I went and looked at the people that did it.
Yeah.
Then went into the forums and read it, and then did a training program and started doing it. And then that was because, life's about having goals. I think, and I remember met this older couple when Rachel and I was away, and we just had a wine with them or something, and they said, Ryan, the secret to life is always having a goal.
Yep.
Always having something to look forward to or working towards. And it's kind of true, So having something to work towards outside of business and family, you're all in as a dad. And having it was this great pursuit. And I got up early. I was up I was doing 30 Ks before work.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
That from triathlons and stuff like that.
There's a lot to be said for endurance sport and just the feeling that you get from it. And if you haven't done it, I don't think you can understand it. But 30 kilometres, I bet that 10 or 12 kilometres into that run, you don't have too many problems in the world, do you?
You don't. And it's beautiful. Like, you're cheating the day.
Yeah, 100%.
You're in the morning and you're just going, that's about grateful, because you're so in the moment, you're looking at it and going, every day, like I run along the water, gee, it's still today. How good is that? Shit, the wind.
Yeah.
And it makes you a lot more present. And I think the other part of it is it gets you kind of out of your head, and I think it's almost like meditation in a sense as well.
Very much so. I think it's similar. You started meditating. Did you discover that for the first time around that point as well?
I'd always kind of attempted and tried, but I was never really consistent.
Yeah.
And I think over the last 18 months particularly, I've made it like brushing my teeth.
Okay, that important.
Yeah, and the reason for me is that, and so it's amazing when you start experimenting as well, is that the simple fact for me is you can put the spiritual side just to the side for a moment, is that you're so much in your own head, you start believing your own thoughts. And for me, meditation for me actually is the discipline of stopping my mind.
Okay.
Right? And observing my thoughts and mind, right? And actually realizing that that's actually not me, because you've got this movie kind of going on all the time. So actually when I sit down and meditate, I almost get a slight headache at the start, because it's almost like the whirring actually stops. But it's just the discipline to actually stop thinking, right? And giving yourself that kind of space, right? And stop internalizing things. And with that, then that almost becomes addictive. Like if I haven't done it, I feel that for the day. And what it actually does is it kind of clears out, and I just feel like I'm a lot more meta-focused on things. I'm a lot more present at certain times as well. And I think I'm a better human, only for the fact is if I'm just about to lash out at the kids or something like that, all it is that I'm observing that reaction, understanding that that's actually not me, and I go, oh, shit, why are you doing that? You know what I mean? So it just allows you, so even from an emotional point in meetings, you're not reacting, you're kind of observing how you're feeling and the thoughts, and just kind of qualifying them in or out. Like, is that you can also be a lot more intuitive, I reckon, as well, because you're cutting away a lot of the static noise. So it's interesting when you start reading about people and you start, it's a bit like the red car syndrome. You start, oh, God, there's that in it. And then you go, oh, shit, Richmond did it last year. And then you go, oh, my God, this entrepreneur did it, or that leader did it, or that. And I'm not an evangelist for it, other than purely from even just a neuroscience kind of day to day for me, it just helps me.
Yeah, okay. So just that detachment, I think that's such a good observation, isn't it? Just to be able to observe, because sometimes it can be, well, I know for myself, I can't speak for you obviously, but your own mind can get pretty wild at times.
Absolutely.
Under certain circumstances. So to be able to have that that leveling effect, I guess, in life, isn't just to bring you back to centre, refocus, as you said, and hopefully, I guess, move in a more direct fashion maybe.
Yeah, and I think, for me, I knew I had to get it, because I started with all the stress and anxiety. I was starting to, I could really pride myself and the importance of being a dad. I had a great dad. Being involved with my girls is really important to me from that balance perspective. Yeah. But I felt myself reacting to sweating the small stuff about stuff. And generally when you're reacting, it's something else. It's like you're carrying, it's like if someone's in a train and, they're bloody staring at you and scouring and something like that. Your reaction is that, why are you bloody staring at me and giving me those, whereas, their dog just got hit.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff that you're carrying all the time that makes you kind of react in specific ways. And how do you become, and then I just feeling like that's not fair on the kids. Like, just because I've got the stress, just because I feel that way, and Rachel will say that to me. She, if I kind of react, and she goes, "What's really the matter? Like, what's happened today?" Yeah. And bloody, she nails it every time. It's like she bloody smashes me in the nose, and says that. So, and what a tool for business.
Oh, absolutely.
Being clear and rational in those senses, it's an amazing tool.
Do you think that, is it that you've always been that way and you noticed it, or do you think that maybe the stress and pressure of business has played a part in that scenario?
I think you're fine. I think when you need things, you find things.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm a big reader now. Yeah. And, you start kind of reading and think, oh, I'll give that a go. And, I've travelled extensively through India, and now we're in Indonesia, and, you watch different cultures, and, again, it's like having this real open-mindedness, like, well, let's just kind of try these types of things. But I think, if I look at the mistakes that I've made in my life, they're often the same mistakes that you've made sometimes. It's a loop. And I think being able to observe and saying, hey, I'm falling back into that pattern again, and that only comes through by brutal honesty with yourself, but also clearly observing your kind of behaviour and why you're reacting to specific things and why you're kind of doing that again. And, and you think about people in life making the same mistakes, and myself that have made the same mistakes, you're not being reflective, are you? You're just falling into a loop.
Rut. Yeah, exactly right. You're in a loop and you're in a rut, and you need something to maybe break out of that. So
exactly,
that makes perfect sense. Just a few questions, and then we'll wrap this up. In 10 years, if you click your fingers and have it all done, where do you sit?
Yeah, what a timely question. So every 10 years I set my goals.
Okay. And
in 2007, I set some specific goals, and I just reset them 4 weeks ago.
Okay.
And I'm a big believer in where the mind goes, energy flows. And
I agree,
so I actually start mine with behaviours, with goals,
okay.
like how I actually want to be remembered. How do I want people to view me?
Rather than the other way around, which would be more typical, I would have thought.
Yeah, I just kind of think about. I think if you lead with kind of behaviours, so I've got certain things that I hope people will say about me that are important to me. So I think I start with that. I actually then reflect before that on the year before. So I actually look at the areas that I made mistakes.
Yep.
Really go hard at myself. What are my blind spots, really? Like, what am I kind of doing again and again and again? And then I start looking at I reinforce what I think my kind of toolkit is, or my wheelhouse. What I'm actually good at. Of all the things I'm lousy at, what I'm actually good at.
Yep.
So this year I'm going to start. I've got to make sure I'm focusing more on that.
Okay.
And then start kind of setting my goals, and then I do it around family, all the 5 kind of key categories, right? So then I start thinking about, so what does my life look like in 10 years? And I've got some kind of aspirations outside of education, particularly around sustainability and urban development. I kind of know what I want to try and do to be able to do that. There's travel. There's some involvement in projects, philanthropic and other things. So without kind of going into excruciating detail today, is that I've set a real plan. And the amazing thing was, when I look back at my last 10 years, part of it was living in Bali with my family.
You said that 10 years ago?
Yeah, as part of my goals.
Part of your goals, yeah, wow.
Which is interesting, because it's amazing life.
Yeah.
Like, when you actually start focusing on things, I'm not talking about the warm and fuzzy synchronicity, but you do manifest stuff in the sense that you're giving energy to it.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. It's the writing things down. I've said it before in these interviews, that even simple to-do lists, right?
Yes.
If you write a to-do list and you throw it away, or it gets caught up in a folder or whatever, and you pull it out a week later, it's like, wow, like 9 of the 10 things are done.
Absolutely.
And I think that goals very much fall into that category for the reasons that you just explained. So,
and I think the first 10 years, when you're getting there, a lot of it there's some material goals in there. I think the more and more you kind of realise, and the more and more you kind of get on as well, is that you can't take it with you. Like, the things now is really around experiences, like goals with my daughters. Like, they're the goals, like things with Rach. What do we want to be kind of doing? What do we want to be spending our time on? Like, I think as you get older, when you got my goals 10 years ago, time's almost discounted, right? Because you got so much more of it.
Of course,
right?
Yeah.
Whereas now, when I'm setting goals, you put a higher value on time.
Yep.
Because you actually got less of it, right? So you start thinking about, you start becoming a lot more finite in what's important to you.
Yep.
And I think for me, a lot of that now is around simplicity and not overcomplicating it. What are the kind of key things I want? Being a lot more ruthless around that as well, and kind of going for that.
What's an example of something that you have applied that to?
I think, say, living in Indonesia, right?
Yep.
I have a moped.
Okay.
It costs me $70 a month and $2 a week in fuel. I've got 10 T-shirts, right, and maybe 5 pair of shorts. And the time with my kids, this whole remote working is of growth. That's a whole nother podcast, mate, we've got to look at one day.
Yeah.
But is that creating moments is the simplicity is not about buying something or getting that. For me now it's about moments. So the other day, part of, my goals this year is like creating moments with my kids.
Yes.
And is it really short? Is that like I'm on the moped, right? You'd never do this in Australia, and probably the police will come and get me here for this. But I'm with my 11-year-old, right?
Yeah.
And I'm driving down. We're kind of driving, and I just thought my daughter woke me up at 6:30 in the morning and said, "Dad, let's go and do something." Like your 11-year-old daughter, how good's that?
Yeah,
hey,
that's awesome.
So
yeah.
lucky, right? Like, so then and then she's like, so we go off through the rice paddy fields. We head out for breakfast.
Yeah.
We're coming down. There's no one around. I said, "Indy, today is the day you're going to learn to ride a motorbike."
Oh, cool.
And we're in. So
first lesson.
First lesson. So she's in there. We're going down there. She's riding a motorbike. And in the end, I'm on the back, and I said, "Indy, you're riding home."
Yeah.
Right? And creating that moment will stick with my daughter forever. Whereas, so when I'm talking about simplicity, is you're complicating it so much with caring what people think about stuff, filling your time with things that aren't really necessary. And I feel lucky that I've kind of realised that the real importance in stuff. And again, this is very easy to say from a white, done okay, living in Brighton, like that's easy to say.
Yes,
but the issue really is that you could keep wanting more and more and more, but to actually realise this, I feel like is pretty lucky for that perspective. So that's simplicity to me.
To be able to narrow that down seems to be a huge component of general happiness, right?
Yeah.
And it's not, volumes is nothing to the focus of where you go. So couldn't agree more. A question I ask everyone, Ryan, if you could have one law changed, what would it be? Changed or implemented, I should say.
That's a cracker. It's a really interesting one. And I might have a little bit of fun with it. If I'm just kind of thinking about it, is I think that gap years should be mandatory.
Okay.
That you're not allowed to go to university after high school. You need to take 1 year.
And needs to be out of the country?
Yeah. Or the interesting thing was when I was in Israel, they go into the military for 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
I thought, oh my God, the absolute skills, bonds, network, life skills, all their startups over there about the people that they met in the military.
Yeah.
Women and men, right? My biggest learning is I didn't go to university. And I got on a plane, I did Camp America. I travelled the world from 19 to 21. You think a lot of my mates and stuff like that, probably still going down the pub doing a lot of kind of things, which is nothing wrong with it.
Of course not,
But I just saw, how big's the world? Different people accepting different cultures and diversity, having to rely on yourself, putting yourself out of your comfort zone and actually understanding a little bit more about who you are, doing shit jobs.
Yeah. It's character building stuff, all travel and all of that, yeah.
And then coming back, because I think at a high school, making a decision of what you're going to do for the rest of your life, with often career teachers that lost the toss in the staff room trying to guide you for one of the biggest purchasing decisions you have to make.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes guided by your parent who wants to be able to be at the barbecue to say that my son or daughter went to Melbourne to do law.
Yeah.
This opportunity for 1 year to go as a rite of passage, I think, could actually help a lot of people define what they want to do and create a lot more happiness in their life as well. So you think about your mates that have travelled and us, there is an adventure, there is a spirit that's part of that. So I'd probably have the law of you've got to take a 1 year gap year.
And if nothing else, just to realise how lucky we actually are in Australia, right? Because
absolutely.
It's I think we're far luckier than a lot of us give ourselves constant credit for.
Yep.
It's very easy, I know, for myself to lose sight of that from time to time, but it's a good place to live, isn't it?
We just don't know how lucky we are. A third of the population can't even feed themselves, know. So if you're kind of really grateful for that, it is a lottery. What a biological lottery to actually get this. That also means that in some ways we should feel a small sense of responsibility for that, is that we actually got a pretty good crack at it.
Yeah.
Like if you can influence things, and you can, like, that's why my kids are at the green school. Like, what's our impact on the world? Just being responsible for how you interact with the world and these types of things. And, rather than just taking all the time. I mean, I think we're at a time where, I know I'm going on a bit, but at a time even as a human race where, you just think about, we're just taking and taking and taking and taking and taking. And it just feels like we're out of balance at the moment. I think there's a greater consciousness kind of coming back to saying, like, how are we kind of back and kind of contributing and cause and effect and all these types of things. But I think, I feel heartened with this next generation kind of coming through as well. I think they're taking that a bit more, being a lot more responsible around that. So I think travel, as we kind of said, gives people that more perspective around, their influence on things as well.
I normally wrap up there, but I'm going to squeeze in one last question, if that's
absolutely.
all right. Can you give us your 2 cents on the state of the great Carlton Football Club, of which we are both supporters?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously deeply kind of love the club. From an early age, I got all the duffel coats, got all the numbers. I used to kick around the ball, my footy, in the backyard, right, in Eltham, right? Yeah. And I used to be shouting out, Kenny Hunter, Peter Pizzusto, whatever. Yeah. And then one day, my next door neighbour, her name was Barbara, popped her head over our fence and said, every day, right, I hear you out the back kicking the footy, and she goes, I'm going down to training at Carlton. Do you want to come? And it was the 1986 before the grand final.
Oh, wow.
Then she gave me 2 grand final tickets. So that woman created, like, do you think about doing something without any expectation? She never knew that eventually I'll go on the board, because probably part of it was because of that. Yeah. And then in 2002, I got involved in the club as a young person, and if you have a look at the compilation of the board, there's some pretty successful business people on there. The 90s was a fantastic sort of era, wasn't it? Oh, mate.
And I had Anthony Koutafidis on the podcast, and we talked a little bit about that. And when you go back and look now, which is exactly what you just said, I'm only repeating it, but I mean, talent in business and in society in Melbourne, and the skill and the talent of the players was unbelievable. So continue. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. And then so then eventually, got really involved in the club, and then one way or another got onto the board. Yep. And then and I was proud of that time with vice president, and interesting time transition with Sticks to a new president. And but I think I only was on there for just about 2 years. Still loved the club. But I think for me it was a time where I had 3 young girls. I was spending a lot of time down there, and I think the group that were down there were the right group to really kind of drive the club forward. So I kind of watch a little bit more from afar, kind of getting a bit more involved in the club now, back again now. But I think if you're looking just purely at footy, I think we're in a pretty good spot. Like 5 rising stars last year. I think our under 21 age group, 22 under that, is one of the most talented lists probably in the AFL. The gap between the 22s to 26s is where we need to go after a few players, and hopefully we can hang on to some of the top ages. And in the next, I reckon, 2 years, start kind of pushing, and then third year, we should be, hopefully a major kind of influence in there as well. But I think we're getting it right on field. It's a bloody hard business, AFL.
Absolutely.
But I think it's an exciting era, and I think there's a lot of fresh and innovative thought hitting down there.
I'm much more distant from the club than obviously you are, but it seems that Stephen Silvani has done a lot of good things with that list over the last few years that it's starting to look a lot more positive than it was maybe if you go back.
Oh, absolutely.
Probably 5 years, I guess, now.
Well, I mean, the old Carlton way was just to kind of top up, and the draft doesn't allow you to do that anymore. I mean, at some stage, with all the supporters and the club, you need to look at it, and you need to build a solid foundation to grow upon. And that actually means that sometimes, we're talking about the reset or whatever, but you've got to rebuild. Yeah. And that means you've got to go back, and it's like being a farmer. You can't harvest all year round. You've got to sow some seeds, you need to water it, And eventually you can kind of harvest. You're just hoping at that stage that the elements aren't going to stuff it up, and that's what luck kind of plays its role in all of that. Absolutely. But I think at the moment we've sowed the seeds, we're kind of watering the crops, and hopefully that allows us to harvest sooner than later. But I think what's the exciting thing now is from a salary cap perspective, I think we've got a bit up our sleeve now. So, as a supporter, I think we could be pretty excited about going after some pretty good people in the near future, you'd hope.
It's getting excited, more and more exciting each week to watch. So is there anything you want to add, Ryan, before we...
No, I just think that, I guess the thing maybe just to finish with is that the difference between me speaking on this podcast today and not, there's so much luck and chance does play its role in this.
Yeah. That's
not to say that determination, grinding it out, arm wrestling it the whole way through and having to deal with all of that isn't amazing. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been where I've had some of the wins that I've had. But at the same time, things go your way at certain stages too. Yeah. And the reality is nothing ever is linear in this. So, I mean, if there's other entrepreneurs going out, if they're reading or watching things and they think that that person just kind of got there because that's the persona that they've created, it's not. Yeah. And when you're actually in that dark spot where you think all is lost, they're often the breakthrough moments where, you keep on kind of surging. But at the same time, understanding and being highly realistic of yourself where you are, pivoting, knowing when to pivot and persevere in these stages. But I think it is a gut-wrenching, tough journey. But at the end of the day, you've got one crack at it. So why not give it a go?
Yeah,
and sometimes we kind of worry too much around outcomes and results and what people think, what parents think, what other people think if you have a go. Then they're not going to, ultimately, you're going to be 10 foot under at some stage. I'm not a big fan of that. We're going to come back.
Yeah.
So when you look back, you're not going to care about that stuff. So, I mean, I just really encourage anyone to, that are going in that. I was there. I'm still there in situations and putting it in. So just kind of keep going. Be brutally honest with yourself of where you're at, but, keep pushing through and persevering.
If someone wants to follow, I know you put out a bit of stuff on Medium, LinkedIn, that sort of thing. Are they the best places to track you down?
Yeah, I think even if if people want to follow BSchool, like bschool.edu.au,
yep,
and just sign up for the newsletter, because what we do is we kind of, which we'll be promoting the podcast here as well, is that we try and find things that kind of inspire. I kind of try, and sometimes I just need to get stuff out of my head, and I write as well, and we do masterclasses with great people as well, and all free.
Yep.
So if that's of interest, then I can kind of be contacted through that. Plus also there's amazing other people that are kind of on their journey as well that we like to kind of share.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to let you go for a run. You're still going to do that tonight. You said you wanted to go for a run earlier. So thanks, Ryan, for having me in, for giving me the time and sharing your thoughts on business and life. And it's an amazing journey, and I look forward to watching from a distance and what you do over the duration of your next 10 years of plans that you've set out. So thanks, mate.
Thanks very much, Matt. Cheers, pal.
Hey everybody, it's Matt again. Thanks for listening. Just a couple of things before you guys clock off. You can get all Trench Talk episodes at xrm.com.au/podcast. You can also sign up for other goodies at the same site. Just plonk your email in there and you are covered. That's X for X-ray, R for Romeo, M for Mike.com.au/podcast. If you really like what I'm bringing you, please head to iTunes, subscribe to this show and leave a review right there. And lastly, if you want to contact me directly, type the @ followed by Mr. Matt Reynolds into your search bar and you'll find all the social links. Goodbye.